Hello again. My name is Theodis Jackson. I am the Chief Educational Officer of the Loveography Institute. Now, what do a Chief Educational Officer do? What are my duties? I guess you can say I'm a teacher, trainer, or an educator that give a detailed analysis of the word called love. Of the word called love. Now, what is love? We teach at the Loveography Institute that love is a positive emotion, the opposite of hate. Love is a positive emotion, the opposite of hate. Love is generated by the feminine energy. The feminine energy is the leading energy of the females. And in every community in the world, the women use this energy as a singular expression, meaning they use it as a grandmother, mother, aunt, girlfriend, etc. The women have not organized a group expression that reflects peace and love like the males have done with war. Now, the leading energy of the males is called masculinity. Masculinity is the warlike energy. The males use this warlike energy as a singular expression. Every day you read in the paper about this husband did this grandfather did this teenager did this also. But also the males use the energy as a singular expression, meaning military, police force, organized crime, drug crews. You can go to Africa, Russia, Mexico, and these organizations I just named exist there. Now, in order to heal or change the world, the women must organize, and the program is called Loveography. The school is called the Loveography Institute. The website is www.loveography.org. Now, when you go to the website, you will find information that would give womankind a faith and an identity. See, once women understand the principles of loveography, they can become a loveographer, giving her a faith and an identity. Like when you hear terrorist, you think of a certain type of male. When you say gangster, you think of a certain type of male. When you say military or soldier, you think of a certain type of male. A certain type of male. We all must have a faith and an identity. This is what life is composed of, a faith and an identity. Now, what does the word love mean to you before loveography? I'm constantly amazed how people use the word love. Most guys I know, when they hear the prefix of loveography, they automatically think Playboy or Penthouse. And when they find out it's not about that, generally they're not too happy. But anyway, I was on a bus, and they had a couple of young roughnecks who was sitting in the back of the bus, and they were talking about they were teenagers. I'm assuming they was high school or maybe college or something, right? And a couple of times I heard them say, like, they love that bitch. They love that bitch, you know. Well, anyway, as the blocks went on, their voices got louder, and there was this guy was about 30 or maybe 40 years old, you know. He jumped up and he said, do you see my mother? My mother is sitting here. I'm tired of y'all using this word bitch and stuff, you know. And you can see he was just like them, meaning he had the same demeanor, the same deportment, but they were just a younger version of this guy. You know, they had to grow into his version. But anyway, they became silent. They didn't use the word bitch anymore because the guy was really angry at that. But love to me it's positive. Bitch is a dog, something low, something negative, and I don't see how they can use the words together. But often in this society, I see people, they do that. They use a negative word with a positive word, and most of them don't know. Most of them don't know. But this is food for thought in case if you ever heard this or ran across this. Now, at this season, many of you probably went to parties. I went to a few parties myself. Well, would I call them a parties? Well, yes, a few yeah, a few parties because there was drinks there, entertainment, and people talk. But something happened to me, and I thought I would like bring this up. I was invited until this party, and when I got there, and I was being okay, it was a mix. You know, you had Italians, you had Jews, you had Spanish, you had blacks there. And I was introduced to this like one homosexual. I'm thinking late 50s because he looked at me, and I figured like the look that I got was lookalike recognition. He had seen my show, and maybe 5, 10 minutes later, it was a big outcome near the door or something. He had got his coat, and he was leaving. You know, he said he had saw my show and he went to my website, and I was homophobic, and he didn't want to be in the same room, and they tell him he had to leave, blah, 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 this and that, but he left anyway, you know. Now, something else happened to me, but this was like the biggest version of it, you know. But as most people who watch the show know that I'm a heterophile. I liked it when the society reflects the opposite sex. You know, I liked it back in the 1950s when it was a heterocracy. Heterocracy is when the schools, the city, the state is dominated or controlled by the heterosexual. Those days are over with. You live in a homoarchy now. You live in a homoarchy now, and I know homosexuals who like are homophiles, you know, this is what they're constructing, this is what they're doing, you know. But like I said, like I'm a heterophile, you know, this is what I like the 50s and the 60s, but I didn't like the racism that was evolved in the 50s and the 60s. But anyway, two things that was interesting happened. Like I said, I was at this party, and this white guy over 50, he was a homosexual, he left. Now, it was about a half a dozen black homosexuals there. I found out like maybe like half an hour later, you know. This doesn't bother me, you know, being around homosexuals. It don't bother me being around like a politician, drug dealers. In the 70s, I knew people who was killing people, you know. Certain things in life you have to accept. This is it, you know, and I understand this, you know. I've learned this in life. But anyway, but anyway, getting back to the subject matter of this particular party. While I was in the party, after this guy left and everything, and I come to find out that like they were discussing a case. A case is like some homosexual, I'm not going to really get into it too deeply, but some homosexual in the city is suing some people for discrimination. And they were talking about it before I got there. And they wanted my take on this particular case. What did I think was going to happen? I said the homosexual is going to win, right? And he asked me, well, why do you think the homosexual is going to win? Because the heterosexual are the majority, you know, and heterosexual make the rules, blah, 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 this and that, you know. And I find that a lot of people have problem accepting the homoarchy. I said, once the homosexual have programs inside of your schools, it's not about the heterosexual no more. And then I explained like how I was growing up in the 50s and the 60s. It was racism. It was a racism program that was given to kids. I often tell viewers about how I was taught like the best thing happened to my ancestors was like they was made slaves and they was brought up to America because they said when they were in Africa, they had no knowledge of God, they had no clothes, and they was running away from lions and tigers. And then the Europeans came along, made them slaves, gave them purpose, you know, gave them, you know, all this crap, you know. Later on, I come to find out all this crap, but they was telling me as a kid this nonsense right here. But as I grew older, I realized why they was telling me that, because they want me to act and behave a certain way. When you tell people certain things like that as a kid, you want them to act and you want them to behave, you know, a certain way. But anyway, like I said, I find out a lot of people are having problems a lot of heterosexuals are having problems when you tell them, would you live in a homoarchy? I said, once the homosexuals enter the school, once they give programs to like the teenagers, I said, you got to remember that their minds are not even formed yet. And they're learning about this subject matter right here. You know, if it was a true heterocracy, like in the 40s and the 50s, you didn't see any homosexuals because it was in hiding. Because the heterosexual realize that once the homosexual gain power, they're going to reverse everything. See, when the heterosexual have power in the community, they always put the woman on the, supposedly they put the woman on the pedestal. The family is the epitome of expression in life. This is what the heterosexuals do. Now, maybe a couple of months ago, I gave a show and I used like China, and I used some Muslim country that being like true heterosexual because they were following their heterosexual mandate because this is what their country was about. And I got a few emails, and the emails were talking about the human rights of women and this and that, et cetera, you know. And they said I couldn't use these particular countries as examples. Okay, now, when I was using, see, all over the world, women are being deceived. They do not know about the feminine energy. They can be in Africa, they can be in Russia, they can be in Mexico, they can be in the United States. Now, what the women in the United States have more so over the women in Africa, Russia, Mexico, so they can buy mink coats, they can buy them a condo. They have a little bit more freedom here. You know, they're a little bit more independent, but still they do not have no understanding of the feminine energy, because the feminine energy produces the peace and love in every community in the world. And if they realized that they were the peace and love in every community in the world, they would be organized by now. They would be organized by now. But anyway, getting back to the party that I was in, that I was invited to, you know, once I explained to the people what a homoarchy was, once I explained to them that this homosexual is going to win the case, you know, because when you live in a homoarchy, the heterosexuals and the homosexuals are equal. When you live in a heterocracy, the homosexuals are in hiding. The heterosexuals do not play that. They do not play that. They do not play that stuff. But anyway, you live in a homoarchy. You live in a homoarchy. Like I said, I'm a heterophile. I like it when the society reflects the opposite sex. But like I said, I'm old enough and I can comprehend the homophile. I can comprehend, I can understand why you want to make everything pertaining to liking to the homosexual, you know. And then every now and then, you know, like at this party, some people always bring this up about like, well, you know, the homosexuals can't help themselves because of the gene that they carry. Because of this gene that they carry. Now, I often talk about this gene. We call it in the Loveography Institute the punishment plateau. The punishment plateau. You can go to www.loveography.org and you can download the Genius of Peace, which is a 110-page, and we'll tell you, give you information about the punishment plateau. Now, the punishment plateau are those human beings who have a gene or gene that would predispose them towards cigarette smoking, cigar smoking, drug addiction, gluttony, homosexuality, murder, envy. All this is genetic. You know, sometimes you can watch television and it would tell you about the genes. You know, people have these genes. You know, I was watching a show one time and they were talking about how they can cut the gene out. Like they know what the smoking gene look like. They know what the gluttony gene look like, so they can cut it out of your child, you know, as they mature in the womb. The drug addiction, the alcoholic, what they call it, the alcoholic gene. They know what these genes look like. They say they can cut them out and they can produce a better child. Scientists said that they can do this. In the future, they said they probably will do this, you know, cut this gene out. But I had the gene of being a drug addiction. I was into heroin. And I was able to kick the habit, and I was able to kick that habit, kick cigarette smoking. That made a better person of me. And because it showed that I had some strength. And the people who did not, I found out later, well, I quit heroin like in the early 70s. And I noticed that people who didn't quit it like in the 80s, they was dying, heart attacks, some people still doing the cocaine, and they was having disease, you know, they was becoming ravaged by these addictions. I knew a few homosexuals. They got AIDS. They wouldn't stop this stuff. And they're not here anymore. That's why I call it the punishment plateau. Because it seems like years ago, it seems like if you live in a country, you act and you behave a certain way. If you live in nature setting, life was set up a certain way for you to live. You don't live in that setting anymore. You live in an artificial environment now. Now, once you're into this artificial environment, the punishment plateau come out. And a lot of people are not able to control these genes. And so the genes control them, and they become like cigarette smokers, they become like homosexuals, they become like mass murderers and stuff because they have these genes, you know. Every now and then on the news, they would tell you about somebody who said they have these genes. I remember watching television one time, and this guy was on death row, and he had killed maybe a dozen people, half a dozen or a dozen people. And he put in a appeal stating that the doctors in the prison knew he carried this gene, so it wasn't his fault that he killed these people. It wasn't his fault, it was the fault of the genes. But, you know, well, everybody's using it. Everybody's using this excuse, you know. To me, I think this is a pitiful excuse right here, you know. But to people who do not know, you sympathize and you feel sorry for them. But anyway, like I stated, I am a healthy heterosexual. And what I mean by a healthy heterosexual, I'm talking about one woman because I only got one penis. See, back in the 70s when the drugs and everything got started, I noticed certain guys, like they would start like freaking off, like if they had drugs, they have 2, 3 women. I could never understand that concept. One penis, one vagina, I never understood that concept. And while I was in the midst of my addiction with the drugs, I noticed most of the people who I hung out with, they looked at it the same way. One penis, one vagina, one woman, you know. But anyway, this is what I call a healthy heterosexual. I deal with one woman at a time. Now, if you go to www.loveography.org, you see new words, new thoughts. You know, I created like 60, 70 new words because we're trying to introduce something new into the community, new into the world. Now, we have a word that we call the homologist. Homologist. What is a homologist? An expert in homology. One who has excessive knowledge in the conduct that serves and develop for sexual congress between participants of the same sex. Now, there are 2 types of homologists. They are called the homosexual, and they are called the heterosexual. That's what they are called. You know. And a homosexual generally try to relate or give his lectures about the benefits of the homosexual organizing and tightening up this heterocracy that they have now. And the heterosexual, who is a homologist, they be talking about how once the homosexual come to power, they always do the same thing. The state takes care of the children. The family is broken up. Woman is reduced to the role of being a slut or a breeder. Same over and over and over again. This is first started like in ancient Greece. They started this practice when homosexuals took power. Then if you read about the Roman Empire, same concept. Same concept. They did a little bit different, but it was the same concept. Because if you read anything or know anything, if you have a minute knowledge of the Roman Empire, I think 10 out of the 13 emperors, they was homosexuals. They were homosexual. And then when Nazi Germany came around, the same trade. The state basically did the same thing. You see, like, a lot of people don't know, but this is not the first coming of the homosexual. This is the second coming. Because in the 1860s, over in Europe, the homosexual role began to rise to power. And they came out with this third sex theory. They were trying to say, like, the homosexuality was a sex and stuff, you know. There was a third sex, you know. And what they did, see, it's 2 kinds of homosexuals, the feminine homosexual and it's the masculine homosexual. So, like, since people didn't have too much trouble with the feminine homosexual, the feminine homosexual was giving the lectures and everything, trying to get the people to trying to get the people to get involved or to accept this new coming of the homosexual, you know, the new coming of the homosexual. And from 1860 until World War II, no, excuse me, from 1860 to World War I, they was building the homoarchy. But because there are not that many, they had to do it real, real slow. See, when a homosexual build a homoarchy, they had to build it real slow. They had to build it with deception because it's more heterosexual than it is homosexual. And generally, when the heterosexuals find out what has happened, the homosexuals they're running the show because they use deceit. They have to do this in order to get over on the heterosexual. But anyway, after World War I, the Nazi Party came about. And then the masculine homosexual joined this government. That's why Hitler had all these sick and depraved people. He had pedophiles. See, I call these people sick and depraved because I'm a healthy heterosexual. And I look at any sex act that doesn't curtail, like the penis and the vagina. I look at all this as being disease. I look at pedophilism. I look at that as being disease, although the pedophiles are organizing. They have their, God. I have to stop right here. I was over a friend's house a couple of years ago, and he was listening to this radio station. And what happened? It was this pedophile. Well, anyway, he had this organization that it was called like Boy Love. And he said he didn't like the word pedophile because the pedophile was so negative. It was, you know, people think of pedophile, they think of being negative. So he created this organization, was like Boy Love, you know. I mean, I was just, because every now and then I'm shocked at this, you know, but you look at, hey, the homosexual, they organize, the drag queen, they organize, so the pedophile, they're organizing and stuff, you know. And then, like, the announcer was asking the guy, you know, did he have sex with the boys? That they, some kind of way, he was trying to say, like, they can help a boy reach manhood easier and quicker and blah, blah, blah. Some kind of stuff, because he was a male and he knew about the males, right? And they asked him, did he have sex with any of these boys? And he said, not unless they wanted me to. Now, this was, you know, he's talking about youth, boys. When I think of boys, I think of somebody under 12 years, under a teenager, 12 years and under. See, 30 years ago, he couldn't have done no stuff like that because the heterosexuals was in control. And heterosexuals don't play this stuff like this. The only reason the homosexual got the power that they got now because they came in through the civil rights movement. They came in when there was a race thing going and the heterosexual community was like fighting among each other. And that's how they got that spot. That's how they rose to prominence. That's how they did it. But like I said, if you go to the website, www.loveography.org, you see such words as Homoville, Hollywood and San Francisco, which are two functioning homodomes. They are established in the United States. Homodome. Homopopolis, the atmosphere that has taken place when a heterosexual is leaving their domain. Homoarchy, the territory supervised by the homosexual. Homicide, what is a homicide? To kill a homosexual. Heterocidal, a killer of or killing pertaining to the heterosexual. Heterocide, to kill a heterosexual. Heterocrat, a member of the heterocracy, one believing in the heterocracy as a legitimate form of government because they are the founders of humankind. I watched this homologist who was a homo. He was on TV. And I see a couple of them talk, But anyway, this guy was married. He used to be married, had a couple of kids. He left his wife and children because he wasn't a healthy or a true heterosexual, And then while he was talking, he stated proudly that he was a masculine homosexual. He wasn't a feminine homosexual. He said, I'm a masculine homosexual. And it just blew me away right here, because, like masculine homosexuals that have made the news in the past 10, 20 years, Patrick Wayne Kersey. He murdered 32 men. John Wayne Gacy, 33 murders. He was a masculine homosexual. Jeffrey Dahmer. This guy, 17 murders. And plus, he was active in gay rights organizations and participate in gay rights parades. You know, like I said, this blew me away when this guy got up there and said he was a masculine homosexual. Because most of the serial killers, or nearly all of the serial killers, are masculine homosexuals. Like I said, the history of the homosexual when they come into power, we call it the homosexual agenda. First, the breakup of the family is necessary. They got to put that into motion first in order for them to get power. Secondly, the womankind function is channeled or broken down to the roles of breeder or slut. This is what happened. And then the state in time would take care of all the children. This is the way it was done in ancient Greece. Homoarchy. Roman Empire, homoarchy. Nazi Germany, homoarchy. And the United States, they're heading that way because you see stories on television, tales of how the state is coming in and taking these kids and making a lot of money off from them. You live in a homoarchy. This is what they do. When a heterosexual is in control, it is about the family, but they're not in control anymore. And like I said, those days are over with. For a little while, those days are over with. I was in a Hilton a few weeks ago, and they had two drag queens. And I remember I had a friend, and he was telling me they got a lot of nerve. I said, no, they ain't got a lot of nerve because they organized. Because once you organize, you can do anything you want to do. I learned that from the 60s. Once you become organized, you can do anything you want to do. But anyway, I acknowledge the Creator as the one who gave me the wisdom and the vision to distinguish the individuality of the two leading forces in the world. Also, I'm available for speaking engagement, individual consulting, discussion, and workshop setup. Please feel free to contact me through the website, www.loveography.org. www.loveography.org. And may peace be with you.